Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dychronic, your host here on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to be taking a look at my top 10 PvP primaries in Destiny 2. And of course, this video is completely subjective. It's based on my opinion, my playstyle of how I like to use these weapons. You are obviously going to have a different playstyle, but I hope you agree with a lot of the things I do talk about in this video. And of course, big shout out to my buddies Zoomzy and Dis for helping me make these spreadsheets, as well as getting the gameplay you can see on screen. Link to their Twitches in the description down below. And of course, as always, I've made the accompanying spreadsheet for this video, which can be found on my Discord server, linked in the description down below, on the channel #SpreadsheetsDocs, where you can find all of my spreadsheets and all of the docs that I create. And this is fully public for you guys to use as a resource, and you should use it. And I know I say this a lot, but these spreadsheets really would not be possible without my patrons on Patreon. The fact is, I make absolutely no money from these spreadsheets, and it actually detracts from the view time on the video, making you go to the spreadsheets instead of rewatching them. So if you wanted to make sure that these spreadsheets continue to be made, please consider checking out my Patreon, link in the description down below. Because if only 0.1% of you give $10 a month, I'd be able to make minimum wage, and I'd be able to make these spreadsheets. Moving on to the main section of the video, let's go ahead and take a deep dive into the spreadsheet. And if you've never seen my spreadsheets before, this is what they look like. Dark theme, color coded, perk recommendations, catalyst information, pictures of all the weapons that I considered for this video, as well as my top 10 honorable mentions, as well as sub ranking. And of course, as you can tell, I don't really make my top 10s like a lot of other people do. I'm not going to be dangling the top 10 on a stick. Instead, we'll be talking about the reasons why certain things are placed in the way they are. Why is it that the auto rifles are not currently in the meta when they were tearing it up in Season of Arrivals? Why is it that the 120 hand cannons are doing better than the 140s, even though the 140s have a better time to kill? Throughout this video, I'll be talking about the reasons why. Hopefully it'll help you understand the Destiny 2 meta and of course these weapons. First up, let's talk about the bows. Now the bows have had the same problem they've had since they were created. You shoot at an enemy in PvP, they lose half their health and go into red, and they just walk behind a corner before you can shoot them with a second shot. Now obviously there are certain combos you can get away with, shooting them with a bow, then switching to a high range hand cannon, and finishing them off with one shot. There are, in fact, wombo combos that bows do work with, but the general idea is that most people can just escape. There is kind of an exception here with Taku's Divination. Because that blind fire thing does not do that much damage to your enemies, you can actually follow up with a one-shot headshot explosion on the enemy as long as they're debuffed. Most people won't realize that debuff may mean they're dead. However, obviously that is a bit gimmicky, so most people will just realize that after you shoot them enough time, and again walk behind a wall. The one exception I will say is that Le Monarch does maybe 95% of your health, so if you're playing Iron Banner against enemies at a little lower level, you can get away with one-shot. Just a quick note on Fighting Lion, it functions very similarly to the bows. It's usually used in a wombo combo to flush people out of cover or to hit them with the Fighting Lion and then follow up with, for example, a 120 kinetic hand cannon. However, I usually prefer using these special ammo grenade launchers as they do a little bit more damage, making the one-shot potential of that 120 a little bit more consistent. Now obviously you don't have nearly as much ammo as the Fighting Lion does, but it just feels a little bit lackluster, and oftentimes I prefer to use a shotgun or a sniper. Up next we have the Sidearms. Now I actually was praising the Sidearms for the PvE side of things, but in PvP they have somewhat fallen apart and are dominated by a lot of other options. The fact is, they have very short range and high damage, and they compete a lot with shotguns. And shotguns are very strong right now, especially after the sniper nerf, so pretty much everybody is running a shotgun. And on top of that, since they're removing Sunset, Felwinter's Lie is going to stay around in the meta. When it comes to my personal choice of sidearms, I think the 3 bursts are going to be your best bet most of the time. They have great kills per clip, great control, large magazine, a lot of availability, and great perk options. An alternative would be the Traveler's Chosen, which is technically my best in class. It's a pretty good weapon with exotic tier stats, and the ability to get 3 Gathering Lights from a single kill is really strong. It works really well with a lot of builds that require ability energy. Especially nowadays with stasis, being able to freeze literally every enemy you see is very nice. Up next, we have the Submachine Guns, which actually got a pretty big buff at the beginning of this season that reduced a lot of the camera shake while using this weapon, which was a lot of the reason why people didn't like to use it, is it was missing a lot of shots and it competed with the sidearms and the auto rifles without really dominating any particular zone. With the reduction of this camera shake, it makes them a lot more viable and more consistently getting 1 to 2 kills per clip, whereas before it was more like 0 to 2. In my opinion, that is going to be the biggest downside to the SMGs, on top of shotguns still being very powerful, is that they run out of ammo quite quickly and you end up reloading a lot. However, the submachine guns are actually doing quite well this season. I might even put this at number 11 or 12 in my top 10, and the aggressive frames are definitely going to be my personal choice. They have a great combination of range, perks, availability, we have a kinetic and energy option, and even though their stability is really low, the recoil direction is actually really high. So once you use them enough, you can control them pretty well. And as a controller user, I definitely feel the impact of recoil a lot higher than the mouse and keyboards, and these are still very feasible. It may not seem like it at first, but definitely a lot more feasible than a lot of these other options. Precision frames kick and recoil and flinch a lot more than you'd want them to, and the faster fire rates just don't seem to reach out to nearly the range that the aggressives do. Even though that, yes, we have that multi-mac with the perfect 100 recoil pattern and the pretty high crit value of the lightweights and the faster fire rate, I personally still like the aggressive frames. SMG's looking pretty this season, but just not pretty enough to get in the top 10. Up next, we have the auto rifles, which actually used to be the #1 type of weapon back in the season of Arrivals, which was only about a season ago. However, since then, there was a pretty major nerf to the 600 RPMs, changing their time to kill from 0.7 to 0.8, so basically one extra bullet, and the hand cannons got a pretty significant range buff, making them a lot more competitive with auto rifles and even pulse rifles. And when you take a look at all of the time to kills, 0.8 is actually still competitive, especially if you consider that oftentimes you may miss a shot or get a body shot. You'll end up going for those 4 or 5 shot kills with the hand cannons anyways. Auto rifles will end up being the better option, especially in the lower level PvP. However, you know that if a big YouTuber says this TTK means this is better, people will just follow them. Now that's not to say that I thought the auto rifles deserved a top 10 spot. They don't, but they're definitely still a feasible option. When it comes to my personal choice of archetype, I find these slower fire rates don't really reach out to that much more range, compete a bit more with these scout rifles and pulse rifles, and have a lot more flinch than is necessary. The faster fire rates compete more with the SMGs, and if you end up missing a few shots here and there, you're going to be a lot less competitive against them. The 600s have a really nice middle zone of range, of control, of mag size, availability, and of course the big one, ease of use. When it comes to my personal choice, the Gnawing Hunger and Summoner are still doing really well. They're excellent weapons with great perks. The Hard Light's basically a super version of that with exotic tier stats, great stability, even bigger magazine size, and pretty good perks across the board. And finally, the Forward Path is not technically on my honorable mentions list because these stats are a little bit jank and are definitely not living up to the Gnawing Hunger. Up next, we have the Scout Rifles. Now, these Scout Rifles, as a blanket statement, are generally known for having higher range, but there's a number of things of why that is not important. First of all, on almost every PvP map, you can approach from a different angle. Secondly, snipers did get nerfed, so you're going to find a lot less competition in those longer ranges, meaning that most people will just go another direction. And thirdly, the aim assistance cone did get a buff last season, making them a little bit more viable in the close range. However, obviously that's where they suffer, which is why usually you'd pair it up with a shotgun, which is a decent combination. I was actually pretty surprised last season that the Mida multi-tool and certain lightweight weapons were doing as well as they were, and that is my current personal pick. When it comes to the archetypes, the slower fire rates fire a little bit too slowly, having a lot more flinch, and again, their aim assistance cone is way too tight. The faster fire rates are a decent option, but there really aren't that many options, and they don't really offer that much more as compared to the 200s. And of course, the Mida multi-tool being one of the better options with incredible 100 aim assistance, having the radar up while you're aiming down sights, and just in general, incredible perks. And finally, the Deadman's Tail, a new weapon this season, the 120 RPM weird lever action scout rifle that acts a lot more like the 120 RPM hand cannons with a little bit more range and obviously the worse aim assistance cone. On top of also having a catalyst which removes all of the blind fire penalties and fires faster when you're blind firing, which initially I thought was going to be a lot better for controller users, as you know the last word is, but it is not much of a controller user thing, it's still a mouse and keyboard thing. On top of the fact that it has a built-in damage perk just by getting headshots, which is really strong. Compare that up with any other damage perk and you're going to easily get 2 headshot kills on a lot of enemies in a row, while also having a larger magazine of 14 as compared to perhaps 8 or 9 that most 120 hand cannons have. So it's definitely a competitive option that still loses out a little bit in closer range, that can be a replacement for 120s and is very available on the current exotic quest. Moving on, we have the pulse rifles. Now, the pulse rifles have actually been doing pretty well since Beyond Light, with a number of slight changes as well as the rise of the 340s and specifically the No Time to Explain. Now, when it comes down to the pulse rifles, they occupy a pretty uncompetitive zone right now where they really only compete with scout rifles and auto rifles, and as I mentioned before, the auto rifles are not really that much in the meta and the scout rifles do depend on certain positionings on longer range parts of maps, on top of pulse rifles being easy to use and easy to understand. On top of snipers getting nerfed, making them a lot less effective with aim assistance and a lot more people leaning more towards shotguns. When it comes to my preferred choice of these pulse rifles, it's actually going to be the 390 pulse rifles, which are a lot more forgiving than the 340 pulse rifles, which require you to have nearly every shot on target without missing, without being flinched, without any damage bonus. The 390s are always going to need at least 3 bursts, so if you miss parts of bursts, you end up getting the same average time to kill. On top of being more controllable, being that their adaptive frame, better stability, means that they're practically having better range than the 340s. And we have a lot of 390 options these days that are still doing really well. We have kinetic option in the form of Hailing Confusion and Bygones if you still want a sunset weapon for regular PvP. We have a lot of energy options with Geon 7, Last Perdition, and Third Axiom, which have ranges that really match up with a lot of scout rifles. And the faster fire rates really do compete more in the auto rifle zone and the higher hand cannon zone that they don't really do that well. And finally, the No Time to Explain, which is basically a 340 with a lot better stats. Solves a lot of the issues you have with the handling, with the stability, and also having a damage perk in the form of the time slip and having good sight. So No Time to Explain definitely set aside from all the other pulse rifles as an excellent option. The only downside is that to get it, I think you need to have the deluxe version of the online or something, which is kind of sad. And finally, the big kahuna on campus, we have the hand cannons. Still, in my opinion, the #1 type of weapon in the game for actually both PvP and PvE. However, hand cannons may not work for everybody, and that's why it's important to understand every class of weapon of how it suits your playstyle. It's definitely one of those higher skill floor, higher skill ceilings that match very specific people. Now, why is it that the hand cannons are doing as well as they are? First of all, they got a big range bonus at the beginning of Beyond Light, making them a lot more competitive against auto rifles and pulse rifles at pulse rifle range, which also means their aim assistance is better at range as well. They also have a very competitive time to kill at their optimal time to kill, very easily making them a lot better with certain damage mods. And finally, this is actually a pretty big one that a lot of people miss, is going to be the fact that they don't depend on sustain. You can go in and out of cover with the hand cannons while maintaining DPS. Where something like an auto rifle, you need to be maintaining your damage the entire time, making them very vulnerable. So if you can land your shots and you can land your headshots and you can make sure you're in the right zone of range, the hand cannons are going to be an incredible option. There's a lot of options from very high skill ceiling to very low skill floor. When it comes to the 3 major types of hand cannons, the aggressive, the adaptive, and the precisions. First up, the precision frames. They fire faster but don't really have a better time to kill, and they also compete with SMGs, shotguns, auto rifles, and pulse rifles. Really not a great range to compete in. The 140 hand cannons are actually the most versatile. If you did not know, the 150 lightweight hand cannons became 140 adaptives, but they maintain their stats. So you have the old 140s having higher range but lower mag size of around 9, and you have the old 150 140s which have higher magazines around 13 but also less range. So you have versatility and you have options between them. Personally, I think they should have maintained their lightweight so that they're easy to differentiate, because they are very different. Some other 140s to consider, things like Thorn and Lumina, have great stats. I did technically lump them in with the 5 position because they are basically just a stat horde version of the 140s. The Thorn having a perfect 100 recoil direction, and of course other great stats and perks as well, and the Lumina is very similar. The Hawk Moon I did set aside as a different rank at #4 because of its insanely high handling, aim assistance, paracausal, being able to get pretty consistent 2 headshot kills, and a 1 headshot kill at certain times, Catalyst making that even better, on top of also having random rolls, meaning you can actually customize it to your desires, having insane handling or even higher range than it has currently. And finally, the Ace of Spades, which I put at #3. I consider one of the best hand cannons to enter into the hand cannons. If you've never used them, Ace of Spades is going to be the easiest to use, with its insane high range of 86, which is akin to a lot of 120s and actually higher. Incredible perks, the Momentum Mori damage is like Kill Clip, it lasts a lot longer. The faster reload, just like Outlaw. The ability to see your radar while aiming down sights, which lends to giving you first shot in most scenarios. And on top of that, also having Dragonfly. The only downside to Ace of Spades is that it has a smaller handling, so just pair that up with Dexterity, and you have an incredible weapon. And finally, we have the #1 weapon on the list, the 120 hand cannons. Now, why is it that I put 120s above 140s, even though 140s fire faster and kill in the same number optimal time to kill? Well, the main difference is going to be the forgivability factor. If you end up getting a body shot or miss a shot with a 140, you always need to take one extra shot. If you get a single body shot and 2 headshots with a 120, you still kill the target. And in certain scenarios where your enemies have 4 resilience or less, you can get 2 body shots and 1 headshot and still get the kill at the full optimal 3-shot kill. On top of the fact, if you get 1 major damage bonus, something like kill clip, empowering rift, inertial override, or anything like that, it gets to be a 2-shot kill, which is way and above everything else in the game when it comes to time to kill. Also having higher range while maintaining around 9 magazine size, which is a lot more comfortable than some of the other 140s, which usually have a problem with their mag size or a problem with their range. The 120s have a lot more range while also maintaining a 9 magazine size, which is a lot more comfortable than certain 140s, which again usually lose out in either mag size or range. The 120 has the best of both worlds, on top of, again, having great availability, new options, great perk options, just overall incredible weapons, and the Sturm having exotic tier stats, being really easy to use, the Catalyst increasing the range is just an incredible weapon. However, if you do end up getting a better version of some of the other options, you're going to end up having a better weapon than the Sturm. This is a great starting point for 120s, and I'd highly recommend it. And that is going to be pretty much the end of the video. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions or concerns or something you thought I may have gotten wrong. Please do actually let me know, but please let me know why. If you don't tell me why, I'm not gonna know why for next time. And of course, as always, big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Really, without their help, these spreadsheets wouldn't be possible because they take a lot of time and make absolutely no money from them. If I didn't have my patrons, I would have to stop making my spreadsheets to get a side job, and they're making it possible for me to do these things for you. Specifically, I want to give a big thank you to Matty Boudou, Mom Dad, Joe Smith, Monday, Natalie Hoppins, Steve Bachnois, Justin Rare, Raymond Showman, Unipanther, Cole Sherm, and Casey Reagan for their support on Patreon. And if you wanted to make this list harder on me to say as fast as possible, please check out my Patreon, link in the description down below. But yeah, that's going to be the end of it. Hope you guys did enjoy. My name is Dychronic, and I will see you guys on the next one.